Everything's been sanded down and ready for some weld bead work and some texturing and priming. Now, if you watched the part 2 of the Gladiator series that I recently released, you've seen me talk about texturing Maschinen Krieger. So some of this may sound repetitive, and it will be because it's texturing Maschinen Krieger. But I'm going to try and do it a little different just to demonstrate some other techniques that can be done. Now, in the Gladiator video that I mentioned earlier, I used Mr. Surfacer 500 to texture the model, and I just stuck the brush directly into the Mr. Surfacer and just dabbed it on, stippled it on. If you want to see how I did that, you can go check out part 2 of that Gladiator build series, and it'll detail that. For this model, just to do something a little different, I'm going to use this Tamiya putty, the basic type. Now, there's several ways to put this on. You can certainly do like I've seen Lincoln Wright do, which is just get some on your finger and you just start putting it on the parts. I mean, you just use your finger to apply it, and that works very well. It's kind of messy, but it's also kind of fun at the same time. What I like to do is use the Tamiya putty and just some plain old nail polish remover to thin it down a little bit. A lot of folks use thin cement, the Tamiya extra thin type, other brands that are like that. They use that, which is perfectly fine. In fact, it makes it super strong. But I just try to be a little more conservative with my materials, and glue is a little more expensive, even though you don't use that much of it. Glue is a little more expensive, and the nail polish remover is really cheap, and I have some. So I'll use it to thin this down. I always like to think of the textured coating that goes onto the model as both an anti-radiation, meaning it protects from radar and lasers, but also kind of an additional armored coating of some sort against kinetic rounds, against bullets and things like that. I'm just going to take this file, and I'm going to, because I'm thinking it's fired from above at an angle, which would be the where you would ideally want to be doing things from ambush, and I'm going to do it right here because it's plausible that it would not have contacted the arm or any other thing, so I don't have to account for it on any other part. But I'm just going to take this, and I'm going to start going just in one direction like that to start the damage, and just continue that until it gets to the point that I think that's what I want. All right, that should about do it. That's just deep enough that it suggests that this armor's fairly thick, but it didn't fully penetrate the armor. And then what I can do is I can show the coating, most of its removal will be down here to indicate that that's the direction of force that the round came from. When it first hit, it had all of its energy, and when it hit here, it would blow everything off that way. So the damage is going to kind of extend down here just above this, and we'll see how that looks. It may just look like a middle-aged, balding, fat guy took a file to his toy model, but we'll see. Now for texturing that, I'm going to use some Tamiya extra thin, and I'm going to use this old flat brush here, and I'm just going to dip it down into the cement and then dab off a lot of it so I don't get too much on there. And then I'm just going to go around and begin putting that on there. Now initially it'll go on and it won't do a whole lot, but as it starts to melt the plastic, it'll start giving me a light textured effect. Now I'm going to go beyond what I'm planning to have the damage, the areas that I plan to have damage, so that I'll bring the normal texture up on it. But what I'll do is when I'm texturing this part of it, I'll just mask over this. So when I remove the mask, hopefully what should be left is this light texturing. All right, I'm going to use some of this yellow-gray milliput. It's a two-part putty, kind of like Tamiya makes some. There's other brands. There's lots of brands. I don't know that the brand is that important. Pardon my hand completely covering the camera. But I'm going to get just a little piece. I'm going to do some weld beads. Now, I will go ahead and tell you, if you watch Martin Kovach's channel, you're going to be disappointed in my weld beads, because Martin is an absolute master of these things, and I've watched him do them, and I've tried to do these weld beads over the years for various projects, and I've never been really happy with my results. But I finally just had to hit on a method that I thought, okay, this will work for me. My eyesight isn't good. I'm not a young guy like Martin. My eyesight's not good, and my hands shake a lot. So what I do is I roll out a little thing of putty. He uses some plastic to keep it from flopping around like that. I just get lazy and use my fingers like this. But once I get a reasonably small bead of it like that, I apply it to the area that I want to have the weld bead around. Sometimes I use my knife to tease it into place. If it breaks, I just put it back together. The weld bead, not the knife. Okay, I finally got this wrangled on there. I had to do it off camera because I have to get right up close to see what I'm doing. Doing it around the camera is very difficult. But you'll notice how thick it is on there, and that's by design. I've thinned it down a little over here. And the way I do that is I just come in after I've got the thick stuff on there, and I just start cutting it away. I used to try and fight to get these very fine, very precise weld beads on there, and I just wasn't having good success doing it. And then one time I thought, why don't I just put a bunch on there and trim away the excess? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go through this process of trimming it away, both on the surface here and on the edge here. And then once I have that trimmed away, I'll give it about 10 minutes to dry, let it set in place a little bit, and then I'll just go in and put in my weld bead marks. All right, now I've cut that down quite a bit. I'm happy with that. I can let it dry, and if I want to trim it away a little more, 10 minutes drying time, 15 minutes drying time, it's going to be a lot more gummy, and it'll be easier to cut. It also helps to put some water on your knife blade while you're working with it, maybe even on your fingers, just to keep this stuff from sticking to you. But I'll give that a little dry time and just go in with my knife blade and put in the weld marks around that and call it done. Now, as I'd mentioned earlier, I've used the Mr. Surfacer 500. If you watch the Gladiator series, you'll see that in use. Now, as I showed earlier, you can use the Tamiya Extra Thin Cement. It's a great way to get just a very light texture. It works at smaller scales. If you were doing something at 72nd scale or 100 scale, something like that, this is going to be more appropriate in terms of scale. What I'm going to demonstrate is using this Tamiya basic putty and some nail polish remover for the texturing. Now, you can just apply this Tamiya basic putty on directly. You can use the cement to thin it. You can just put it on directly with your finger. I like the nail polish remover just because it lets me thin it down just a little bit. It slows the drying time down and gives me, I feel like, just a little more control over the application. But the point I'm trying to make is, don't let anybody try to tell you that there's one correct way of doing it. When you're trying to apply texture, you decide the amount, you decide the method. If you've never used any of these, experiment with all of them. See which one you like. And whatever you do, if you're having fun with it, that's the right way to do it. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to put some on the bottom of this mixing cup. And I don't know how much that is. We'll just call it a blob. When I'm doing this, I always do it by eye, and I just thin it by eye and by feel. So as you can see, there's that much in it, a pretty good blob. And then what I'll do is just take my nail polish remover, making sure I don't pour it out before I get to what I'm doing. And I just pour some in the lid like that. And then just splash a little bit of it onto my desk and into the cup. I should have used a paintbrush to guide that, so hang on, let me clean that up. Now, as you can see, it does damage the paint and the surface of the cutting mat, but that's why I've got it down here. You can look, you can even see the pattern in there. But it did what I want. Now, this stuff does stink. You want to use it in a well-ventilated area. Once you get it poured in, the odor goes way down, but it's not something I would do in a very enclosed room. The room I'm in is very large, good airflow, and all that. Now, all I do once I get it in the bottom of my cup is I just mix it around like this until I get it so that I'm not worried so much about whether it's thin or thick. I'm just worried about getting all of the putty dissolved. That's what I'm really looking to do. And then I'll evaluate, is it too thin? Is it too thick? And if it's too thin, then I add a little bit more putty. If it's too thick, then I add a little bit more of the nail polish remover. Now, the texturing is fairly simple. You just start applying it just like you would with the Mr. Surfacer 500. And I've got this stuff. Turns out it's a little thinner than I normally do, but for the sake of demonstration, I'll go with it, because what happens when it starts drying is it starts getting sticky. And when it starts getting sticky, you just keep bouncing at it like that. And continued application of just a little bit at a time will start building that up, but it'll start pulling up the material that you've put on the surface. And as it gets tackier, stickier, then it'll start leaving more of a textured surface behind. And this is pretty much what you do around the entire model. Now, you figure out through experience what level of texture you want, what level of texture you like to have. And you can vary it by the thickness of the material that you're applying. But the more you peck at it like this, I guess you'd say, like a chicken looking for food on the ground, the more you do that, the more the texture builds in. You dial it in exactly the way that you want it. Heavy, light, in the middle. You can vary it. You know, if you think it needs to have more on the forward-facing surfaces and less on the rear-facing surfaces, that's fine. You just keep putting it on until you get it exactly like you want. And you can avoid details with it. If you do get a little in near the detail, then what you can do afterwards is just go in with a cotton bud soaked in alcohol. I don't recommend using the nail polish remover to clean up, but a cotton ball soaked in alcohol, if applied before it gets too dry, you can clean up in areas that you don't want it to be. You can also use the blade of your knife to scrape it up, and sanding paper and things like that. As time goes on, the stuff in the cup will dry and begin thickening up if that's what you want. Sometimes I like it that way because I'll do areas that I want thin first, and then as it thickens up, I'll just start moving into the areas that I want to be thicker. So you can do it that way. If it starts thickening up more than you want, just add a little nail polish remover to it, and that'll bring it right back. It's kind of like using lacquer paints, only leaving a lot more texture behind. So I'm just going to continue in this fashion around the rest of the model. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and call this end video. I thought I'd get a little further in this video, but for these Patreon releases, I don't try to set as much of a strict timeline because I like to, honestly, I try to be more thorough on them, just to show my work in a lot more detail than I normally do. And just when I start running up on the timeline, call it done and keep going in the next one. So that's what I'm going to do here. But off camera, I'm just going to get all this texturing done. And if I've got any special areas that I'm going to be working on, like I'm going to show how I'm going to texture over that damage that I did on the upper part of the body and some of the things I do after the texturing to bring back panel lines and stuff like that. So that'll be in the next video. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing this basic texturing with this Tamiya basic putty. And it's kind of a fun, relaxing process. A great way to spend a quiet afternoon if you don't have anything else to do. So thank you so much for being a patron or a YouTube supporter, depending on where you're watching this. And I am very grateful that you choose to do so. My family and I are very grateful. And I hope this has been helpful and sparked some ideas. And I will see you in the next video.